I'm Eliza Leone. I'm the registered dietitian with Restaurant Associates. We do the food service on the HMS campus here. We have a really fun recipe tonight. And we don't need to preheat the oven for anything, so that's good. If you haven't washed your ingredients yet, those of you cooking along, then go ahead and do that. But of course, we'll have time to prep everything during the class, as always. So today we're going to be making what I'm calling a warm, brothy lentil and grain bowl. So this is like basically a warm bottom and then like a salad garnish on top. And the goal or the aim of this meal is to incorporate all of the 5 basic taste sensations. So we're going to talk about that as we go through. There's going to be a lot of tasting as we go. Like I always encourage that in all these classes, but definitely want to encourage you to taste as we go this time so you can see how something tastes on its own, and then you can see how it tastes all together as a part of the dish. So that's kind of the magic of these 5 basic taste sensations. They are the basis of flavor. So that's kind of a fun topic to go over tonight. So let's see. We don't, as far as safety information goes, we don't really have anything to be concerned about tonight. Nothing that's concerning to be eaten raw, of course, except for the lentils and the grains. Not that you can't, but it's just not the most appealing. Also, aside from the feta, everything else in this dish is vegan. So that's another fun tip. And make sure, again, you've washed all your produce, you've got a nice sharp knife, and you are, prepared to handle any hot pans or anything like that as needed. So with that said, I'm going to just jump right into it. So we've got, as usual, the overhead view. So I can ask, there we go, Samantha just spotlighted this overhead view so you can see what I'm doing as we go along. So let me pull out my notes here. All right, so our plan of work for this class, so the order in which we are cooking and preparing all the ingredients is we are starting first with making our mushroom stock. This is going to be a really great flavor that we're going to use to cook the lentils and the amaranth. Amaranth is the grain that we're featuring tonight. Then after we do the stock and put the lentils and the amaranth in to cook, we're going to start prepping all of the raw ingredients that we're using to make that salad and to have the garnish on top. So then we're going to assemble everything at the end. So it's a bit ambitious for us to say we're making stock in a 1-hour class. So this is a very quick stock. But what we're putting in this is first celery and carrot. So I'm going to walk us through cutting up this carrot. We're just going to cut off the ends. I'm using only half. I'm making half the portion that is in the recipe that you all have. But the recipe that you all have calls for 1 large carrot or 2 small carrots. And all I'm going to do is I cut the end off. I'm holding it in place and I'm slicing it in half lengthwise. Then I put it on the nice flat side so it's sturdy and doesn't roll around. And I'm cutting it into planks. I'm rocking my knife down. Got my planks. I'm going to move over to the other. Cut my planks here. Then I'm going to sort of lay them down a little bit. Lay them down. Turn them this way. Perpendicular. 45-degree perpendicular to the knife. And just go all the way through. It's a good thick carrot. So we're roughly chopping the carrot and the celery. We're not going to go too crazy with trying to make it like a nice perfect dice or anything like that. I'm just chopping any of the extra big pieces. But the reason we're just doing a rough chop is because we're actually going to be straining out the veggies from the broth, or from the stock rather. So, all right, we've got a quickly chopped carrot, pushing that to the side. Then following the recipe, it would be 4 stalks of celery. I'm cutting off the tips and bottoms, composting those. And celery is kind of fun to cut because it's already got this U shape. So you can just Guide your knife all the way down the middle there. Celery is always one of like the most satisfying things to cut because I feel like it makes such a good crunch sound. So now I'm lining them all up flat at the end and just going all the way down. Again, they don't need to be like exactly the same size or anything like that because we're going to be straining those out. All right, so we've got our carrots and celery already cut. Now you're going to want to get a nice, good size, like heavy bottomed pot. I'm going to bring over my induction burner. All right. Got my pot. I can put this up a little higher. All right. So perfect. I'm turning this on to medium high, and I'm putting in some canola oil here. Recipe calls for 2 tablespoons. You can also just eyeball it. But I'm letting the oil get nice and hot before I add my carrots and celery in there, and we're gonna brown these. So this is basically the starting point of any stock, whether it's a vegetable stock or even like chicken stock or anything like that. You're gonna start by browning your veggies. And browning, if you're using like chicken flesh, then you would put that in to brown as well. So I can hear it's getting hot, it's getting sizzly. I'm adding in all my carrots and celery. Right? And this is all I'm adding at this point. So while this is browning, I'm just going to be kind of stirring it often because I don't want it to burn or stick. But while this is browning, I wanted to talk about the difference between a broth and a stock. So stock traditionally does not have salt or pepper added to it. It's got really just like only the naturally occurring flavors from the ingredients that you've added. There's no added salt or pepper. Versus a broth does have added salt and pepper. Also, stock is if you're making like a chicken stock or something with animal parts, a stock would typically be made with the bone, whereas a broth is made with the flesh. But just making a vegetable stock, the benefit of stock versus broth is that stock has more there are more opportunities to use stock because it doesn't already have the salt in it. So if you were using a bunch of leftover food, vegetable scraps to make a veggie stock, then I would definitely recommend not adding any salt or pepper to it until you reheat it to cook it with whatever it is that you're going to be having for your meal. So that's not to say that you can never add salt or pepper to it. It's just that you don't add salt or pepper or other seasoning until you're actually finishing the dish. So I'm tossing this around again, trying to make sure it doesn't burn. Any of you that have made bolognese sauce or like a hearty ragu sauce, or if you've made homemade soup before, you have probably used carrots, celery, and onion as the base. Those 3 together are called a mirepoix, M-I-R-E-P-O-I-X, French word for this trio of flavors that acts as the base of a lot of dishes that are prepared in this way. Brown first, and then you add liquid to deglaze it, and then you incorporate it into the rest of the dish. The reason those 3 are put together so frequently is because they provide 3 very different flavors. Yes, thank you for the spelling, Samantha. 3 very different flavors from these 3 ingredients. So carrots are like sweet. Onions are very aromatic, very like, you know, the flavor of an onion really comes from like the scent rather than a taste. And celery provides that like nice earthy flavor. So the 3 of those together go really well. All right, so this is starting to get a bit brown. So what I'm going to do at this point, I have some dried porcini mushrooms. These mushrooms, they're dried because that concentrates the flavor. So I'm just going to put these on my cutting board right next to the next to this burner, and I'm going to again roughly chop those, just like we did with the other ingredients. And I'm going to throw them right in to the pot. If you were only able to find fresh mushrooms, not dried, then you may just need to add like a little bit more in order to get the same concentrated flavor. But anybody, you want to unmute yourself? Anybody know which of the 5 basic taste sensations mushrooms provide? I feel like this is a more trendy taste.
Is that umami?
It is umami. It is umami. You're right. And I'm going to also ask again in a bit if you can all name the other taste sensations. All right, so I'm throwing these dried porcinis right in here. And I'm going to stir those around to make sure they get coated with the oil. And we want them to heat up a little bit so that they can start to like, you know, release their flavor. I'm also going to add in, so if you are making the amount in the recipe that I provided, then you would be adding 2 cups of porcinis. And the next ingredient we're adding is thyme. Fresh thyme is a classic ingredient combination with mushrooms. So I'm only adding like 1/4 of a bunch. If you're making the amount in the recipe, then you would add a half. Again, tossing this around, I just want it to warm up a little bit so it starts to release its flavor. And then we're going to be adding water. And the water will help us unstick any of the brown flavor that got stuck to the bottom of the pot. And that is the deglazing process. All right, so these are nice and warm. I'm going to add, again, the recipe at home, you would be adding, I wrote 6 to 8 cups because it depends on if your burner tends to cook things kind of fast, like mine does, I would err toward the high end, the 8 cups. But if your burner tends to be a bit slower, you can add the 6 cups. I don't know if you can hear that sizzle, but you can see the steam here. So the water is definitely.
And Eliza, quick question. So I'm adding the bulgur. I couldn't find the amaranth.
Okay.
So I have to look back at your email. I'm sorry. Less water right now?
Let's see. If it was bulgur.
I can find your email.
I think I can't remember what I wrote in that.
Oh no, let's see.
I think it was more water for bulgur beet because amaranth weirdly doesn't actually like absorb that much water.
Okay.
Bizarre. But I think bulgur you might want to add a bit more. But you know what you can do is start on the low end of that range, and you can always add more water if you need to while it's cooking.
Right. Okay.
Add it at this point, that's okay. Oops. So yeah, that Bev had reached out to me earlier today saying that she couldn't find amaranth. So I know that it's kind of not a very typical grain. I'm going to show you what amaranth looks like raw. Teeny, 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 tiny. It's like the size of poppy seeds, basically. And they really don't open up a whole lot. kind of like interesting. But all right, so we've got the water in here. And so it's carrots, celery, porcini, thyme, and water. That's all we've got in there right now. So I turned it up to high heat and I'm bringing it up to a boil. I'm just checking my notes. So yeah, once it comes to a boil, we can kind of keep it on like a medium heat and we'll let that go for a little while, for probably like a little less than 10 minutes until we add the lentils and the amaranth. So I just showed you the lentil, or the amaranth rather. So amaranth, like I said, it doesn't really get very big. If you have cooked quinoa before, you see, you know, when you cook quinoa, it kind of looks like there's a little like string inside that's coiling around the edge. Amaranth does end up looking a little bit like that, but even smaller than quinoa. And then the lentils we're using today, these are black lentils, aka beluga lentils. These are smaller than the average lentil, but when they cook, they do get bigger. I think the lentil that most people are familiar with would probably be like brown lentils or green lentils. That size is probably what most people are familiar with. So this is a bit smaller than that. And it's actually really cool. So the natural coloring that makes these black, when we cook this in the broth, the black color leaches out into the rest of it. So you end up with like this really cool black lentil and grain mix at the end. So it's like not a typical color that you would have on your plate, but it looks really cool. Okay, so while this is coming to a boil, you can see that the mushrooms are starting to get a little more hydrated. They're a little bit squishy. We're essentially making tea. You know, we have all these dried ingredients in here and we're steeping them. That's what a stock is. We will be adding salt to this after we strain out the solids and we keep the liquids. But I wanted you all to taste the umami flavor before we get to the salt part. So we could taste it now and then compare it to, you know, when it's finished or whenever we decide it's finished in the next like few minutes. So I wanted to show, it's a very light color right now. I'm gonna make sure to blow on this so I don't burn myself, but can any of you describe umami? How would you describe that flavor?
It just gives a richer mouth taste. It fills your mouth, whether it's, you know, really good pho or, you know, that kind of stuff. It's just got a it's not the salty, sweet, bitter, you know, it's just got its own richness to it.
Exactly. It's definitely like an earthy flavor. So this just came to a boil. I turned it down to medium, although my burner doesn't really register the heat changes. So I would turn it down to like a medium or maybe a medium high because you want it to still be bubbling. But yeah, umami is such an interesting flavor and it's hard. I mean, that was a good way to describe it, Margaret. But yeah, it's like, it just kind of like rounds out the flavor of everything else that it's with. And other dishes or other ingredients rather that have the umami flavor also tend to have other tastes as well. So it's hard to identify. Like soy sauce is an example of something that is a great source of umami taste, but it's also got a ton of salt. So the salt kind of like overpowers that taste. So can anyone tell me, Margaret just mentioned a few, but does anybody else know what the other 4 basic taste sensations are? We got umami. The other ones are more basic, more well-known. I've mentioned one already.
Sweet.
Sweet.
Sour.
Sour.
Bitter. Bitter.
And last one.
Salty.
Salty. There we go. We got that one.
Salty.
I'm surprised that bitter was not the last one. I think that's the one that people tend to forget about. But so those five, like I said, those five taste sensations make up the basis of flavor. So think about some really classic examples of like something that's really sweet. For example, like caramel, really sweet. But when you add sea salt on top, it makes it like a bigger flavor. And when you add bitter dark chocolate to it, then it's an even bigger flavor. So it just, you know, adding all these different taste sensations, it like creates a greater depth of flavor is kind of a good way of saying it, even though that is kind of like an abstract way of saying it. But trying all these individual ingredients tonight and then seeing how they go together will help to, you know, help you understand. So I definitely encourage you, if you don't intend to cook this, I encourage you to learn about different dishes that combine these taste sensations. Trying to think of some other classic examples. So, I mean, we're making a vinaigrette tonight that has lemon, honey, and it's going to have a little salt in there too, along with the pepper and the oil. So those are three basic taste sensations in one dish, one recipe. You know, way more, you know, everything you eat basically comes from these five tastes. The flavor that you consume is created by these five tastes. So this is looking good. If we remember how lightly colored it was at first, I want to see if it's a bit darker, which it is a bit darker. It might be a little hard to see on the camera, but it's a bit darker. I'm going to taste this too and see how it is now. So with more heat, we are like agitating the ingredients in this water to try and encourage them to dispel as much flavor as they can. Yeah, it's so cool how that flavor just gets richer and richer. So like I said, if you're making, you know, any kind of stock, you always want to brown. So if, like I said, if it's a chicken stock or something, for example, you would brown your veggies and your chicken flesh first. Then you would add the water to deglaze, and then you'll add your bones or your Parmesan rind or any of the other things that are, you know, definitely meant to be removed at the end, but that really, you know, bring a lot of flavor to the stock. So this same exact process can be done with so many different ingredients. We are doing like a slightly faster version of this, so you might not have it be, you know, this bubbly. If you were making it at home, you could turn it down to like a medium low and let it go on your stove for, you know, an hour. So I know that I want to get the lentils and the amaranth in this by 6 o'clock. That's my goal. So I think what we will do at this point, Bev, if you want to leave yours in for a bit, you can. But I'm going to start straining this out just for the sake of time. It will absolutely, I did this test run last night, so I know that it still comes out really flavorful and really delicious. So you don't have to make it go longer. This is okay. A shorter way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to show you this. So I have a strainer inside a big bowl. So we are straining. This is basically the opposite of pasta. I want to keep the liquid that comes out, and I don't want to keep the solids. The solids, however, you can save them and, you know, throw them into a rice or some kind of like a casserole dish, or puree them to make a sauce. So there's lots of other things you could do with these solids. You don't have to like throw them away because they definitely are edible. I would just say pull out the thyme sprigs before you eat. So I'm just pressing this with the back of my spoon to get as much liquid out as I can, because those mushrooms are very spongy. And then you'll see, you know, this was clear water, and now it's a thick, cloudy, shimmery, light brown stock, which is very cool. All right, so I have this strained out. I'm going to go back to my stove top. Turn this up to high. Pour my stock back in. And here's where you can finally taste it and see what kind of salt and pepper you would like to add. So this is the point when the stock becomes a broth. So yeah, again, the color definitely got darker than it was before. It tastes great. Like it honestly, I think Margaret, you said like pho is a good example of something that has the umami flavor. So like a broth that you find in like Vietnamese soup pho or in like ramen or something like that, those broths for sure have umami flavor in them. So I'm adding a little salt and pepper. I'm just doing a pinch of each. You can always add more, but you can't take away. Stirring that in to dissolve. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and dump in my lentils. So the amount that I'm using is half of the amount of the recipe at home. How much liquid do you have now? Good question. So we ended up, I'm trying to remember my recipe notes when I tested this recipe, but so we started with 4 cups and we ended up with like 3 cups. I think it reduced by 1/4. So I just added my lentils and I'm adding my amaranth. So the reason I'm adding them both together is because they cook at the exact same time. I wanted to use a grain that maybe was something fun that you all haven't seen before, but also something that cooks at the same time as the lentils. So like Bev was asking earlier, you know, saying she couldn't find amaranth, so she wanted to use a different grain. So a different grain might absorb a different amount of liquid, and it might take a longer or shorter time to cook. So I had recommended bulgur wheat, and that you would add like after, not at the same time as the lentils, but a little bit later, 5 to 10 minutes later. All right, so this is boiling here.
You weren't kidding. The color changed quick.
I know, very fast. I want to get my white spoon again to show you, like, you can see it's kind of like a grayish liquid now, which is really cool. So, all right, this is boiling. I'm going to turn it down to like a medium. And I'm going to put this behind me so I can work on my cutting board again, but I'm going to remove this just so I can move my burner and not drop it by accident. Okay, so it's really cool to see the amaranth. It kind of like blooms very quickly. So I'm going to put a cover on that bowl or on the pot. We don't have normal pot lids in a commercial kitchen, so I'm using a big bowl. So, all right, that's now on the back burner. I got it on like medium, maybe medium low. Again, my burner is super high powered, so adjust it to what you think. It should still have some bubbles going in order to have it finished by the end of class. So, all right, at this point, we're gonna make our vinaigrette. So I already mentioned some of the ingredients that we're using for this, but the first, so actually, this vinaigrette, it has honey in it. And honey can sometimes, if you've ever made a dressing with honey before and you try and whisk it in, it can be really annoying. It gets stuck to the whisk. You have to shake it for a long time. So what I'm doing instead of whisking is I'm putting it in a little container and I'm gonna put all the ingredients in here and put a lid on and just shake it up instead. It just makes it easier. So I've already got 1 tablespoon of honey in this container. I'm gonna cut my lemon in half. This is, our chefs ordered Meyer lemons, so it's like the color of an orange, which is really funny. Although I've seen Meyer lemons before and they weren't always this color, so maybe these are a special batch, but it is a lemon, even though it looks like an orange. So I'm cutting it across, in half across, so we can juice it. I can hear the pot bubbling behind me. I want to make sure it's not bubbling over. So I'm going to juice this. I know from testing this recipe that these are very juicy lemons. So I'm going to start with just a half, and then I can add more if I need. But the trick for juicing is rather than, okay, so here's the cup. Rather than putting your lemon in this way, so it fits the shape, you put it in this way, so the juice goes out the holes, and you're inverting the lemon to really squeeze all the juice out. So that's the trick with using these hand juicers. So yeah, this is definitely a nice juicy lemon. So I'm going to start with that half. And we can always add more if we need. So next I'm going to add some oil. So I've just got olive oil here. And a typical ratio of acid to oil for a vinaigrette is 3 parts oil, 1 part acid. Some people say it's 2 parts oil, 1 part acid. That's my preference because I really love, I always use lemon as the acid. I love lemon. But vinegar is also, any kind of vinegar could also be the acid. So it's really whatever you prefer with that ratio. But I just kind of eyeballed that. The recipe called for 1/4 cup of olive oil. But like I said, you can always add more, you can't take away. So start low and you can add more later if you need. So I'm gonna do a little trick here. Instead of adding the salt and pepper right now, we just have the sweet, the sour, and the oil. So I'm going to shake this up. I got my lid on nice and tight. Hopefully it doesn't make a mess. And I'm going to give this a taste to see how just the sweet and sour taste together before I add the salty. All right, I've got my little tasting spoon here. Some of that honey was still stuck on the bottom, so I'm just going to stir that up. I need to shake that a little bit more. All right. So it's a nice bright color because of the olive oil and the lemon. So here we go. I'm going to taste this. That's super good. I actually think I want to add some more lemon. So you can modify the taste however you like. These juicers, for a long time, I didn't use one of these. I just used my hands. I was like, I don't need to dirty another dish. This really is like the best kitchen tool. So highly recommend if you don't have one at home. And it makes it so you don't have to fish out all the lemon seeds when you're done juicing.
And really good with limes for margaritas.
Exactly. All right, I'm shaking this up again. I'm making a little bit of a mess here, but that's how it goes in the kitchen. All right, give it another taste. Yeah, that's super good. All right, so I got oily hands here. I'm gonna change my gloves, but I'm gonna add a little bit of salt and pepper to this. And I'll shake that up again. And then we'll be good to go with the vinaigrette. And we'll move on to the next step. So like I said, we've got basically like we're doing like a salad on top of this warm bowl. And we've got lots of fun ingredients for this salad. I had on the recipe, I added some optional ingredients, but I'm including those optional ingredients tonight so you can see how pretty they are. And encourage you to want to use those ingredients when you make this at home. All right, so this dressing is good to go. I'm just going to set it to the side. I'll wipe off my cutting board here. Okay, I'm going to check on my lentils right now. So looking good, definitely like a nice dark liquid. Oh, I'm steaming up the whole camera, sorry. You can't even see it. Kind of hard to see. But yeah, definitely still a little ways to go. Okay. All right, so the next ingredient we're going to cut up is a pear. So I've got this pear here. Pears are in season right now. So we're going to be putting this, we're going to be slicing it in like a nice vertical way. It looks nice and pretty. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut it in half vertically. And then I'm going to lay it on the flat side like always and cut it in half again. And then we've got like a little bit of a, you know, the middle there with the seed. So I'm going to just lay it on a flat side and cut at an angle to remove that middle core. I'm going to do that for each of these. Some of them have more of a core in there than others, but all right, there we go. The next one. So any kind of pear would do for this. This is just like a nice garnish option for the salad. All right, so what we're gonna do is just stand it on like whatever feels like a nice sturdy flat spot. And I'm just gonna cut it in slices, and I'm going to try and keep, like if any of the slices get stuck to my blade, I'm going to unstick them because I want to keep them in the order that they were sliced, because then it looks nicer for display reasons. I'll move this over here. Move on to the next. This one's got some nice like red and green on it, so that will look nice as well. So pear is obviously a sweet addition to this dish and can also sometimes be tart, depending on the pear. So if you're cooking, taste the pear and see if yours is tart or sweet, and that will like help determine how you should adjust your other ingredients. This one's pretty sweet, not very tart. How beautiful, this fade from green to red. Oops, now I'm making this. It looks so pretty. Okay. All right, I'm gonna cut through the rest of this. Check my time. Might move on to the next ones instead of cutting all this pear. So we have a really fun ingredient that actually adds some spicy to this dish, even though spicy is not one of the 5 basic taste sensations. But this is a watermelon radish. Definitely not the prettiest thing. It's a root vegetable, so you can clean it really well. Like the carrot, I also didn't peel. I just cleaned it really well. No need to peel it. So it's called a watermelon radish, not because it tastes like watermelon, because it definitely doesn't. It's because it looks like a watermelon. So I'm going to cut this in half, right down the middle. Oh, this one's kind of pale. Hold on. See if I can get it better. It's not the prettiest. I've seen prettier watermelon radishes. And you have too in the picture in the recipe. But you can kind of see how it's got the green outside And then there's like an additional white ring. And then you've got the pink. So it's definitely a really beautiful, it looks kind of muted here, but it's a really bright, like fuchsia pink. It's really, really pretty. But don't let that pink color fool you. This is like very peppery. It's not spicy, like burns your throat, but it's peppery, like it prickles your mouth. And it's very like a very interesting flavor. So again, if you're cooking along with us, try a piece. It's super interesting, this flavor. And I'm slicing it really thin because you really don't need a lot to get that flavor. Super thin. Okay. This is like so thin that you can like see my fingers through it, but that's really all I wanted because it's a very peppery flavor. And like the more you chew it, the more flavorful it is. It's really like a cool, it's a cool addition to a salad. And this time of year, root veggies are being used more and more because they're like some of the best options for seasonal, local. Because root veggies, you know, the veggies that grow above the ground have kind of been nearing the end of their season. Ooh, this is a better watermelon looking slice. Green, then there's like white, and then it's pink. But yeah, so root veggies, because they grow underground, their season lasts longer. So we've got the watermelon radish. A little goes a long way with that one. And all right, next I'm gonna move on to the greens. So I had one green in the actual recipe and then one as an optional. So I'm gonna show you this optional one first. This is called sorrel, S-O-R-R-E-L. And we actually grow, or we don't grow this, but we purchased this from a vendor that grows this hydroponically, meaning it can be grown year round. It's not outside in a garden, but in like a more controlled environment. So it's this little patch of sorrel in this like spongy soil. And it's not even actually soil, it really is like kind of like a sponge. So it provides the moisture that this needs to grow like nice and firm and colorful and beautiful. So I'm gonna chop off the stems right above that little spongy thing. You can also buy this when it's actually in season, is more like in the spring. And you know, you don't have to buy the hydroponic version. You can buy the, you know, the kind that's grown from the ground. But actually, I was gonna chop this more, but I don't think I will, because these are really beautiful long sprigs, nice long red stems. The color is really, really beautiful. So this is specifically called red vein sorrel for obvious reasons. If it's not red vein sorrel, then the veins are just more like a light green or a white color. But this is just a nice kind of like a light green that's used as like a really beautiful garnish. When I was testing this recipe in our kitchen, I was asking our chefs, like, oh, I feel like it needs a little more color. What should I use? And they were like, oh, we're doing a catering event. Use this sorrel for the catering event. And there was a huge box of it. And I was like, oh my God, this is beautiful. So that's why I added it as an optional ingredient, because it may not be available in grocery stores, but it's a fun addition. So the green that we're actually focusing on, this is called escarole. So it comes in like a head that grows nice and wide. You really want to make sure that you wash these very well, because there can be like a lot of soil or sandy dirt trapped in the bottom. So this is a bitter green. It's very fascinating how if you cut this into small pieces and toss it with that sweet and sour dressing, the flavor just kind of combines with everything else, and you don't taste the bitterness as like fiercely as you do when you eat it on its own. But if you're cooking along, go ahead and take a little piece and taste it so you can see how it naturally tastes, how bitter it actually is. Again, the more you chew it, the more the flavor comes out. And there are a lot of greens that are pretty bitter. A lot of greens that people use often, like arugula, kale. But like I said, when you dress the greens or when you cook them or anything, it makes them, you know, it causes that taste to combine with all the other tastes in the dish. So truthfully, I'm not a bitter fan. So eating that leaf on its own doesn't taste that good to me. But I know, because I created this recipe, that when you combine it with everything else, it's delicious. It's delicious. So I stacked up all these leaves together. I stacked them all up so they end basically at the same spot, because I'm just going to chop off that end where it came down to the root. But I don't want to cut too much because it's nice to have that nice crunchy white part. Anytime you get a nice crunchy lettuce, that means it's full of water, very hydrated. So I'm gonna do, like I said, I'm gonna cut this really skinny into nice skinny ribbons because I like it that way because it like breaks up the bitterness into small pieces. And then when you toss it with the dressing and everything else, then it's just a great combination. So I'm just like basically shredding this. It's nice and crunchy, good satisfying crunch as you cut through it. So for this dish, you know, any green would do. So if you're not able to find escargot, that's totally fine. But I would recommend trying to use something that's like a bitter green so that you can represent all 5 tastes. So getting like arugula or Tuscan kale or dinosaur kale, not the curly kind, because that is kind of a bit more like, people don't like that as much. So this is nice and skinny and shredded. So I'm going to place that to the side. I'm looking at my time right now. So I've got just a couple other ingredients to talk to you about here. So we've got some feta cheese. I already have this crumbled. If you don't have it crumbled already, you can go ahead and do that, or you can just feel free to chop it up. I've also got some sunflower seeds, roasted and salted. These add a nice crunch as a garnish, and the salt, of course, adds a salty component. And then I've also got some figs. Figs are super delicious, really, really beautiful. So just like a really, really deep purpley brown. And I'm just gonna very carefully pull this stem off. And you can kind of see it's like nice and squishy and juicy. I'm gonna pull the stem off the other one very carefully as well. It can rip, so you definitely wanna be careful. You could also just chop the stem off. I'm just gonna cut this in half lengthwise. So these are fresh figs, not dried. Really gently cutting it in half because I don't want to smush it. So pretty. It always mutes the color a little bit, but the inside is definitely a lot more pink than it shows on the camera, for me at least. The outside is like purple, and then you've got like a light white, slightly green. And it's so cool because it's like squishy. You can like stuff goat cheese in here for an appetizer. So figs are a really fun option for a garnish or an appetizer or something like that. So I just cut those in half. That's all I did for that. Now I'm going to check on my lentils and amaranth again. So checking my time to eat. Wow, this is looking good. Sorry, blocking the view with steam. Let me get one of my white spoons because that helps you see it a little bit better. So still steamy, but you can see how dark this is. And you remember the amaranth color? It was like a light green, or sorry, light like tan beige color. That also absorbed the black from the lentils. So everything is just this like deep brown, like inky color, which is fun. So this actually looks like it's done to me. I'm looking at the bottom and it looks like something got a little bit stuck, but that's all right. So what I could do is add a little bit extra water to help scrape that stuff off the bottom. But you can see it's like easy to push around because it's still got some moisture in there. Like it falls right back down after I push it because it's not like dry. It's definitely still got, it's not like soupy. So when I was trying to think of the name for this dish, I was like, brothy kind of makes sense. It's not a soup, but it's got like a good amount of liquid in there. Just like juicy, kind of. All right. So I'm going to start assembling because I think we are good to go. Yep, check my list. We already prepped everything, so we're good to go. Bev, how are you doing at home?
I'm good. I had actually prepped a lot, so I'm not as frantic today. And the bulgur looks fine. I mean, it definitely doesn't have any broth left in the bottom.
I mean, that's totally fine. You could, if you wanted it to be a bit like juicier, you could add a little bit of water and just kind of like stir it around so that the water like soaks on the flavors, just so you have some extra like juices or broth, but it doesn't need that. It definitely doesn't.
Okay.
All right, so here we go. I've got my favorite bowl plate. Oh no, I'm just doing this. It's like a half bowl, half plate kind of thing. That's my favorite dish. All right, I'm gonna put this right in the middle here. Try not to make too much of a mess. And you can obviously plate this however you like. I'm just plating it how I had it in the picture that you all saw. So spreading it out a little. Then I've got my escarole. I'm gonna put that in like a pile. And stick some of the watermelon radish in there for a nice bright pink color. All right, I've got my sliced pear that I'm gonna like line it all up and then hold it at the skinny top and just kind of like fan it out. And use that for the display. Kind of just tuck it in there. All right. I have my sorrel, this really pretty red vein sorrel. I'm gonna tuck it in there as well. And it's funny, so when I test these recipes, I end up eating a lot of this stuff over the month. Get very familiar with different ways to eat these dishes. So I actually brought home some of this last night, and at home for dinner we did a fried egg and we served that over the lentils and the like the brothy amaranth. So that's another thing you could do with the leftovers if you decide that you prefer to have the salad on the side rather than on top, then that's an option. But of course, the lentils and the amaranth being a whole grain, we have plenty of plant-based protein here, so there's no need to add egg or anything like that. But just another fun way to eat these ingredients. So I'm adding my feta, sprinkling that around. I've got my sunflower seeds, some nice salty, crunchy stuff going on. And then I've got my dressing. Again, I'm just gonna shake it up to recombine those ingredients because this dressing doesn't have anything in it that's emulsifying it. It's just a typical vinaigrette. So definitely need to shake it before you use it. All right, and I'm gonna use a spoon to drizzle this vinaigrette on top. And I feel like I'll probably also drizzle some olive oil because I always do that, and it just kind of makes the dish feel like finished when I do olive oil. So, all right, got some olive oil here. Might do a little bit of salt. And here's our dish. I don't think I forgot anything. I think I got it all. Yeah, I got everything. So yeah, you can see like the texture of the lentils and the amaranth down the bottom. And then this nice lighter salad on top. You've got the pear, the sliced pear with like the red to green gradient, which is really pretty. So you've got your salty feta, your salty sunflower seeds. You've got your umami lentils and amaranth. You have the sweet pear and dressing. The dressing also provides sour. Then you have a bonus with the spicy peppery radish. And what am I missing? And the bitter greens, of course. So you've got all of the basic taste sensations here to make this really, really like interesting, full flavored dish. So yeah, I think we're ending like just on time, which is perfect. Anybody have any questions, or do you have like your favorite types of tastes or any kind of taste that you like to avoid?
Here's mine. Am I the only one who cooked? So I used oh, you can't really see it. I used arugula.
Oh, okay, yeah, perfect. I'm a big proponent of arugula because you don't have to prep it. I think that also is just like a great shortcut. You just like, as long as you get it from like a washed, you know, it says triple wash or whatever, and you just dump it right out, and there you go. Way easier. But yeah, so arugula also is bitter, but I think it's probably less bitter than escarole. Escarole is like definitely another example. Have any of you had radicchio before? It's like kind of like red and purple and white. It's really crunchy, like cabbage. So that is very bitter. Also, broccoli rabe is another very bitter green and vegetable. So I feel like personally, I feel like if I eat those bitter things, I have to have a lot of the other flavors, the sweet, sour, salty, to like help make it more appealing to me. Because bitter is not my thing.
I've never had broccoli rabe raw. I've only had it like sauteed or cooked or something, but I love it.
Do you? Okay. Do you drink black coffee by chance?
Yes.
Okay, so you like bitter. You like
I like bitter.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, I add cream and sugar to my coffee. I don't like the bitter stuff. But yeah, so I appreciate you all being here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eliza.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you
to
for all that info.
All the time. I always appreciate seeing you. Always good to see you all. So yeah, let me know if you end up making this. I would love to see pictures if you want to send. And we'll see you next time.
Looks amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.